Professor Wergely's here. We just got into some great examples that are comparing JavaScript and the DOM. We looked at changing HTML elements. We looked at changing the properties. We also looked at changing styles. We're now going to take a look at the DOM events. So let's get into it. Now, JavaScript can be executed when an event occurs. We've seen that with the onload. We've also seen that with an onclick. So here's an example when the user clicks on an HTML element. So in the previous code examples, we clicked on a div, it started an animation. We clicked on a div, it changed the color. We clicked on a paragraph tag, it showed the time. I can use JavaScript to execute this when an event occurs. Now, when the event occurs, is that JavaScript, is that HTML, or is that the DOM? That's an important aspect to learn. So to execute code, when a user clicks on an element, we're going to add JavaScript code to an HTML element attribute. We've seen that with onClick. So I do onClick equal to the JavaScript function. Make sure you remember the parentheses. Now, some examples of events are when a user clicks on the mouse, when a web page has loaded, when an image has been loaded, when the mouse moves over an element, when an input field is changed, when an HTML form is submitted, when the user strokes a key. Okay, if I click on the enter key, maybe I want the form to be submitted. So I need to program that with JavaScript. Now let's specifically take a look at the onClick event, because that is going to be the event we've learned in the past and one that I want you to be familiar with when you get to the exam. Now the onClick event occurs when the user clicks on an element. We've seen it before, but let's go over it. So the way we did it was we had an HTML element. We specified the onClick in the HTML element, and that pointed to a JavaScript function. Okay, in this example, we're going to execute this JavaScript function when the button is clicked. Inside the button, it's going to say click me. So the user clicks on it, this event will be triggered, and the function will be fired. It will be executed. So here's the syntax. I can either do that on an element using JavaScript. I could use the onClick. I can also do that using JavaScript. So I can use JavaScript, get element by ID, dot onClick, and set it to a function. So I can use JavaScript to get the document object. I can use the DOM to get the object, and then set the onClick attribute and set the onClick event. Now let's take a look at the onload event. This is also one that I want you to be familiar with when you get to the exam. The onload event occurs when an object has been loaded. Onload is most often used within the body element to execute a script once the web page has completely loaded all of the content, like images, scripts, CSS, and everything else. The onload event can be used to check the visitors. However, you can also use the onload on any element. So here I could say once an image is finished loading, then put an animation on it, or once a paragraph tag is finished loading, do something. So onload is mostly used with the body. It can be used on any element. Onload can also be used to check the visitor's browser type and browser version, and load the proper version of a web page based on that information. So let's say I know the transition and the transformation does not work with Internet Explorer. So if I have Chrome, Firefox, Safari, I do the animation. If I have Internet Explorer, instead of crashing the site, I do another animation that works with Internet Explorer. Or let's say I know that the form element date does not work with Internet Explorer. So on Chrome, Firefox, Safari, I use the date picker. On Internet Explorer, I just have a text field. Or let's say I use a modified text field to collect the date from that browser. So based off the browser, I can load different contents depending on which one will work for that specific browser. So the onload event is very powerful. It can also be used to deal with cookies when I'm sending cookie information, which we're going to talk about in the future lectures. Now, like we said, the onload event occurs when an object has finished loading. What does that mean? Okay, well, let's look at an example of the body. So if I want to execute a JavaScript immediately after a page has been loaded, I'm going to specify that on the body. Once the body's finished loading, the DOM has finished executing, and then this script will be triggered. It'll be fired. So here's the syntax. I can either specify the onload on an element, or I can also use it with JavaScript like we've seen on the onClick. I can put an ID on the body, I can grab the body, and then set the onload property using the DOM. Now, it's very important to know the difference between JavaScript versus the DOM. We're going to go through this in detail. It's going to be on the exam. It's going to be on the quizzes. You're going to be asked this, and you're going to want to know what you're talking about. And I'm going to explain all of that in the next video. So stick with Professor Wergeles, and we'll see you in the next video.